You're listening to Classic Dialogues, Land Power in the Indo-Pacific, a China Landpower Studies Center production. The views and opinions expressed in this podcast are those of the authors and are not necessarily those of the Department of the Army, the U.S. Army War College, or any other agency of the U.S. government. I'm talking with Colonel Rich Butler today, the director of the China Landpower Studies Center in the Strategic Studies Institute at the U.S. Army War College. It's always great to chat with you. I'm glad you're here.
Stephanie, it's great to be with you today.
Let's talk about the China Landpower Studies Center. When did the Army War College stand up this organization?
Well, we officially opened our doors in January, but myself and Josh Arostegui, our chair of research, got here last July, and we've completed all of our hiring actions, and we've gotten in a few more folks. So we're a total of 6 folks right now between Josh and myself. And then Brian Carlson, we stole him out of a think tank in Europe to be our expert China-Russia relationships at the strategic level. And it has been a huge asset to us already. And last month, we received Jake Vartanian, who's one of our intelligence analysts, and Rick Gunnell, who just arrived from Textor, who is a fantastic researcher on the PLA, specifically looking at their leadership and their organizations. And early on, we had Dr. Sheena Greitens out of the University of Texas at Austin come in as a full-time visiting professor for us this year. And she's done exceptional work on the region, both China and DPRK, and she's been value added as we start establishing ourselves as a center of excellence here.
What are your major production lines going to be?
We're primarily doing open source intelligence or open source research, and we're particularly looking at the function of how the PLA Army, the largest service and the most culturally significant of the services in terms of how they fight and how they organize themselves and what they want to do. And that reflects a bit of a gap in the research agenda that ourselves and the other PME institutions and other think tanks and federally funded research organizations, for example, look at. Looking through that lens of what the Army, or really what their strategic land power does, if I can use that term, their Army, their Marines, their special operators, the People's Armed Police, and how they do security both inside the state and externally to the state that impacts the military realm, how they tie into their joint force in peacetime through protracted war, and how they tie into what the Chinese Communist Party would like them to do to help overturn the international order as a stated goal, because they want that order shaped to be with more Chinese characteristics, and they'd like to exclude the United States to the maximum extent possible. From the standpoint of doing that research and then putting it into publications, our general lines right now, we can publish through our website, and that's generally a practitioner review standard. Relatively shorter articles, less than 4,000 words is how we envision it, because we want senior leaders and practitioners who are very busy to be able to read and digest that, as well as doing peer-reviewed academic articles, being able to publish those out through parameters, for example. And we also encourage other academics and practitioners to come in and play in those lines and publish. We'll also do some external publication. For example, Sheena and a co-author just recently published a nice piece in Foreign Affairs. Josh is preparing a submission for War on the Rocks with one of our other research professors here, Major Brendan Devereaux. So we'll do some external publication. And we get into how do we do outputs and engagements? How do we go do things like support war games? How do we go to conferences and take our research and get it out into open space and have an open discussion among the communities of practice and the communities of interest? So those are all very important things as we look at how we do research, how we do analysis, and then how we do education. Education is another thing. We don't necessarily regard it as a research product line, but we also do things, for example, like Josh and Brian have already stepped in and started doing support to the School of Strategic Landpower, where the War College students actually get educated as young senior leaders. And so they've been participating and contributing to that. We've been able to contribute to a couple of war games. I was overseas a couple weeks ago with the International Fellows Continuing Education Program with a lot of brigadier and major generals and senior colonels who are graduates of the great institution here at the War College, and bringing them up to speed and talking through hard issues related to what's going on in the region. So we're contributing both internally and externally to the college. We intend, obviously, to be an open organization, because we're up on social media as well as the website, and we'd like it to be a dialogue, and we'd like people to be able to contribute to that research and comment on that research and that analysis that we're doing. One final thing I'll talk about from the analysis and education piece is not only is it contributing to other people's conferences, like the conferences that the other PME institutions run or National Bureau of Asian Research, NBR. We also have an annual conference here that we've run for years, but we're going to try to take it to the next level now that we're an established center inside of the Army's think tank, the Strategic Studies Institute. So this fall, we'll host a 2024 Carlisle Conference on the People's Liberation Army, and that'll be kind of our capstone conference. We're trying to do themed research years that allow us to drive through the conference and start hitting some of the important things that our stakeholders would like from us, notably folks like Indo-Pacific Command, U.S. Army Pacific, Headquarters Department of the Army, and others, so that we can feed them information that helps them do what they do as professionals and senior leaders. Our theme for this year's conference is actually protracted war. From the PRC's perspective, how do they think about it? A lot of the lessons that we're learning out of the last 20 plus years of conflict in the Middle East and before that in terms of short, sharp wars may not hold true against peer rivals who are regional or global hegemons. And we think that's a very important thing to look at from the standpoint of, first, how does the potential adversary view that type of war? Secondly, what does that mean for how we deter each other, perhaps? And then you can sort of shift into what are they doing to get better for the type of war and the character of war they may be ascribing to. Then going back, what lessons does that have for blue? So the beauty of having these really amazing, talented researchers that I talked about that are here now. In fact, we've got one more coming who will be on board in the summer. They're all Mandarin enabled, so they can do in-language translation, in-language analysis. We're also going to be classified so that we can actually have discussions, not just in the unclassified lane, but we can shift to the classified medium as well.
You talked about this a little bit, about some of the work that you have put out as an organization. Do you have any other specific examples?
So a few things that have come out recently, I think that matter. Number one is last January, we held the 2023 PLA conference where we looked at how things had changed over the last decade. And that was my first introduction. The center hadn't stood up, but I actually flew in for the conference. And I've been to a few of the PLA conferences, and they're fantastic. But looking at that decisive decade, what's going to happen in the next 10 years? And that publication of papers from the panels just came out, and Josh and the editing team from the War College Press did a great job on that. I mentioned Sheena Greitens just with a co-author published, I think is a really significant essay on how the PRC views using the non-traditional security sector and how that actually undercuts the traditional security sector in ways that we don't understand or didn't expect because it didn't happen in the Cold War, for example. That was in Foreign Affairs a few weeks ago, and we're linked on our website to it. Dennis Blasco, who is probably the senior mentor and most knowledgeable person on the PLA Army, wrote a nice article for us, a breathtakingly detailed article demonstrating how the PLA Army has built up significant logistics and cantonment infrastructure and troop movements associated with the challenge of the India-Oxai-Chin border area, and how they're preparing for the long haul there to keep that a militarized struggle, if you will. Marco Lyons, the Assistant Chief of Staff, G5, out at U.S. Army Pacific, wrote a fantastic essay looking at a future war with China, starting with the vantage point of a similar article that was written about 15 or 20 years ago and updating that. Really nice piece talking about the changing character of conflict and how the adversary has changed, not just the PRC, but also talking a little bit about the DPRK in Russia as well. But the important part is, the PRC's the pacing challenge. If you look at how these states are sort of colluding, they're the only one that can draw them all together in terms of like what happens if a protracted war happens? How does that play into the protraction itself, options that come out of that protraction, and simultaneity, or creating opportunities where the DPRK or Russia may actually collude. There's a host of different research going on outside of us that I'm happy to see coming online because that changes a lot of what we talk about and what the U.S. military should be doing and where we should be. I published a really short piece on implications from a historic perspective of what modern warfighting concepts should consider, noting that joint warfighting concepts driving a lot of how we think about the character of war from our perspective in the United States, as well as driving some of the force design and capabilities that we need. And one of the product lines I didn't talk about was this podcast itself, the Classic Dialogues podcast. So we've had General Flynn out at USERPAC and Lieutenant General Brunson and Major General retired Mick Ryan as guests. And we look forward to pushing out 2-ish podcasts a month where we can take some of the things that we've been writing or researching or get senior leaders involved in talking about what's important about the Indo-Pacific, what's important about the Army in the Indo-Pacific, and how should we be thinking about the Army and the Joint Force and conducting military campaigning. In the future, a whole tranche of things that we're getting ready to do. We're in the throes of just starting to design the PLA conference and the panels and associated research with the theme of protracted war.
When is that?
That's going to be the 16th to the 18th of October here in Carlisle. It'll be a curated audience, but we'd also like to be able to get people dialed in a secure webinar format so we can follow some Chatham House rules and have some really good conversations. The output of the conference, the papers, will be unclassified and submitted onto the website for everybody to see. Brian Carlton is working a monograph on the ongoing relationship between Beijing and Moscow. I think that's going to be really worthy of understanding how the strategic and operational lanes sort of tie together. Josh Aristagi's been working a piece on how does the PLA, in particular Army, do campaigning, and how does that compare to some of the things that our Army in the Pacific does, and who's kind of got the upper hand in that. One of our researchers, Jake Vartanian, is working on a chapter for a conference on the PLA Army and how they're shaping themselves to be a great power army, if you will, tied to their joint force. And Rick Gunnell just gave a great presentation, and that'll be a published paper on how the CMC operates and what that means in terms of decision-making and how they view running a campaign or a warfight. Talking to our sister centers like the China Maritime Studies Institute or CASI, the Air Force Institutes, the Air Force folks, or Phil Saunders and Joel Withnow and his guys down at the National Defense University who run their China Center. You know, they've been welcoming in open arms and really providing good guidance on what to do and not to do as these things stand up, because they're significantly more established than we are, having stood up sometime between 10 and 20 years ago. We're really grateful to them in terms of getting things going here.
Where can people go to find all this great work you all are putting out?
It's ssi.armywarcollege.edu/CLSC. So China Landpower Studies Center, CLSC is the 4 letters. We say classic. And on social media, we're up on Facebook, LinkedIn, X, and Instagram. And we're searchable under CLSC or China Landpower Studies Center. They'll pop up right away.
Well, before we go, do you have any concluding thoughts you want to share?
We're happy to be a part of the community of interest. We hope you'll come visit us frequently. We also want to hear from you. So on the website, there's also direct links where you can reach out to us. So if you're interested in any of the research we're doing, we'd love to hear from you. If you're interested in providing some research of interest in terms of how the PLA Army or its adjuncts think about land power and what that means to us, we're happy to hear from you and happy to talk about doing some coordinated research. We've got a great team here assembled, and we're looking forward to the future.
It's exciting stuff. It's always a pleasure to talk with you. Thank you for making time for this today.
And Stephanie, thank you.
For more War College podcasts, check out Conversations on Strategy, SSI Live, and A Better Peace.